What paranormal/creepy events have you experienced? Staying overnight with a very pregnant friend who was nervous about being alone since her furnace was having issues. Every time the furnace came on, it startled me. I was on a couch in what would have been the dining room, had been trying to sleep for hours when the doorway into the living room fogged over and an elderly man walked to the door, told me he was my friend's uncle and not to worry, he'd keep an eye on things until morning. I just took him at his word and turned toward the back of the couch and zonked. The next morning I told my friend I'd had a dream about her uncle watching over the house. She gave me a weird look and asked what color his shoes were. I told her I couldn't see his feet, they were in the fog. She laughed and told me he'd lost his legs to diabetes when she was young and died shortly afterward, but came to wake her up when the wood stove got too hot. After we ate breakfast she brought out a picture of some men standing together. I pointed out the guy I'd talked to the night before. It was him. First night sleeping at my grandma's apartment, they gave me the office room to sleep in. Comes midnight I hear a voice saying "Vete," Spanish for get out. From that day onwards I slept with a cousin in the living room. Months later my cousin told me that while he was playing in the laptop at 3 a.m. he felt a hand touching his arm, like a solid feeling. None of that. I think I felt a hand, nope. He said it was as if someone put their hand on his arm. A couple of months after I left that country to come to the US I was talking to my two cousins and one of them told me that while she was in the kitchen, she saw a face on the door that connected to the living room. The other one, the one that had felt the arm months before, told me he saw a lady in the hallway right in front of the office room where I heard a voice telling me to get out. The creepiest part about this is that it's not only the apartment that is haunted, it's the entire building. Each apartment and floor has its own ghost story, and it's so bad that each person they have hired to be a security guard at night, since it's a dangerous country, has quit because they can't bear how bad it gets late at night. I consider myself a rational person. Of course, most people would believe that of themselves, however objective they try to be. This is something that happened to me and a friend around 18 years ago. I was hanging out with him and his cousin in his new house. This was a somewhat busy area near to a major commercial center. At around 9 p.m. we decided to take a walk to a convenience store for food. His cousin decided to stay at the house. It took us 30 minutes to get to the store. There was a fair amount of vehicular and pedestrian traffic. On the way back we both started getting this really weird feeling. It's hard to describe now, but both of our experiences matched up when discussing it later on. It felt like the air was much lighter, thinner. The street seemed odd somehow. Out of place. All of a sudden there were no cars or people around. Everything went dead silent. This continued for a few minutes and we both started walking faster. What freaks me out to this day and what I could never explain is this: both our watches stopped working. My digital and his analog. His watch stopped at 9:41 p.m. He was later able to get it fixed. Mine was dead for good. When we got back to the house, it was minutes to 11 and his cousin was freaking out. We were gone for an hour longer than we were meant to. There was no way we could have taken that long to get back. If anything, we walked faster than we did getting to the store. It's something I usually don't like thinking or talking about. Neither does my friend for that matter. June 26, 2003 I was over at a buddy's house in the sticks. There were cornfields around and about half a mile was town. We went out one night and we were walking down a road with a cornfield on the left and woods on the right. I looked up and said, "Man, you can really see the stars out here," and I swear I see a star move to the left, stop, then go out. I mention what I saw and not even 5 minutes later I'm looking in the field and I can see something moving back and forth in the field. It was silent. I didn't say anything. My buddy says, "You see anything weird or notice anything?" I said, "I think there is something in the field." He said, "Yeah, I see it also." We both started running and I'll never forget him looking at his watch going 2:47 a.m. Okay, it's 2:48 a.m. and so on. I asked him why he was doing that. He said, "Missing time." We make it to the end of the road leading into town. As we were crossing a bridge I heard a footstep in the woods. I screamed like a girl so loud and ran. Before I knew it I was in town. The town was empty though, no one at the bars, nothing. So we go to the gas station and hang out until 5:30 and the sun comes up. We go back to his house, but at this point I am so scared I couldn't sleep until noon. A few years back, a close friend died. I was washing dishes in the middle of the night and my back suddenly felt warm, like someone was hugging me from behind. It was comforting. Security guard here. When I work alone, I always hear doors slamming in areas where I can clearly see there is nobody there. Motion sensor lights kick on their own, and something likes to play with the radio volume, which is controlled from a little gear closet almost nobody has access to. You get used to it. Not a security guard or anything, but I live in a haunted house. Getting used to it for sure. Been here for almost exactly a year now, and something fucking wild, but not really documentable, occurs once a month at least. Wife had an invisible dog run around the house and jump on her at night. I had gigantic person walk up to the bed and then stand on it. Never have had sleep paralysis, haven't had any dreams like that before or since, therefore I cannot grant it that prosaic explanation with certainty. I just held my eyes shut until it stopped. Have had several instances of loud footsteps clearly walking through the house. It's an old building, so this one is most likely to have a prosaic explanation. But the only issue is that we are deeply familiar with all of the sounds that occur here, and none of them sound like one-to-one heavy footsteps. The roof creaks, the floor is solid. The most likely to be explainable is that one time the toilet flushed on its own. Definitely not 100% that was anything paranormal in particular, but it was odd. We've both heard each other's voices when we weren't here, and just this morning my wife heard my voice/a male voice right outside of the house when I was 40 feet away starting her car to warm it up. Silently. There's a corner that our dog is terrified of. Again, likely prosaic but still odd. Our friends have all seen things here. One friend saw a gigantic gray thing outside of our front door. Other friends saw a person walk into our bathroom and close it at night, and they were certain it wasn't me or my wife. I think it's my town. Can't disclose it because it's too small. But when I was young I witnessed one intense high strangeness event, and someone close to me who lived here was abducted by aliens in the 90s. This person has no reason to lie about this, no history of any distress-induced hallucinations or anything that could explain their certainty other than that something strange simply did occur. They also encountered MIB and had a standoff with guns when they were followed out of the city they worked in. Frankly, that event could probably be explained by the fact that they were on the early internet attempting to acquire a rocket launcher in order to try shooting down the UFOs that were constantly hovering over their yard. Probably someone trailing them to figure out why they wanted illegal weapons so badly. They did some investigating into the phenomenon and stopped after getting trailed/having guns drawn on them, and also after a private investigator that a woman they were helping, with regards to alien incursions, had hired was found murdered inexplicably in that woman's backyard. They did find quite a bit of evidence that what they experienced was not limited to unreliable accounts, just that most people keep quiet about it because of how difficult these kinds of phenomenon are to explain without sounding crazy. I was probably 12, staying over at a buddy's house. His dad was a cop and very reclusive, so as much as I hung out at their house I had only ever seen him a handful of times and never engaged him. We had a spot in the basement where we played Nintendo. To our left was the furnace/workshop room. His dad usually stayed upstairs, but not in the living room, usually the parents' bedroom I suppose. So when I saw him standing in the furnace room at the workbench, I'll never forget he was wearing a red flannel. I was shocked to see him look at me and grin slightly. My natural reaction was to look away, and a second or two later when I curiously looked back at him he was gone. I didn't think anything of it. Later on, upstairs he asks his mom where his dad is. She says he's off at work. I said no he isn't, he was just downstairs at the workbench. Buddy and his mom fell silent. Mom asked me what he was wearing, and I replied a red flannel. My buddy was petrified, the mom visibly shaken. It's not until years later that I realized I'd seen a ghost. Neither mom nor son ever elaborated on it. Shortly afterwards we went into junior high where I found new friends and kind lost touch with the buddy. The end. I was staying over at a friend's house when I was 16. It was pretty late and we were in her room watching a movie when all of a sudden we saw headlights coming at her window really quickly, like it was about to hit the house. We both screamed and jumped out of the bed, then nothing. We ran to look out the window, but no cars were in the driveway besides her mom's. Their driveway was long and their house was pretty far off the road and isolated, so if someone was turning around we would have seen them. Shortly after that the phone rings. It's the police calling to tell her mom that her dad had drunkenly crashed into someone's house. We told her mom what we experienced but she didn't believe us. No one we told did, so we just decided from then on to keep it to ourselves. We still talk about it once in a while 22 years later. It is one of the weirdest experiences I've had to date. The house is haunted so things move a lot or get knocked over. often vanish, and if you ask the ghost nicely you get it back where you checked already. You can be alone, so it's not a prank. Been happening for years. Happened to others too. You can put something in the place it lives in and never gets put anywhere else. You check and it's gone. You ask for it back, no one there, and it's back an hour to two later or maybe the next day in the exact same spot it lives and you checked. Happened to not just me and have been going on well over 10 years, maybe more than 18, but I can't remember when it started. It's got much more frequent after my mom died, although she didn't die here. Most days something gets knocked over in front of your eyes. Things go missing at random intervals and get put back in the same spot after you ask. Creepiest was when I once looked for something and the only place it ever goes and it had gone. Asked for it back, went to the toilet, came back and it was there. No one else there. Also, you can be in bed and feel something sit on the bed. Felt both large and small sizes, so not sure if one is an adult and one is a pet. No idea. Quite a few things. My coworker claims something is attached to me. I don't think that, but I have seen some things. The first big memory was as a small child. My parents' house was built into a hill in 5T country. My siblings and I had our rooms in the basement. Across the hall directly from my room was the storage/furnace/water heater etc. room. It was completely underground and had no windows, so even during the day if the lights were out it was pitch dark. Since my siblings and I were so young, there was one of those night lights in the hallway between our rooms. I woke up suddenly and immediately had this sick to my stomach feeling and all my hairs were standing on edge. That's when I saw it, just outside the light, coming out of the storage room, the dog. I should mention, we didn't have a dog. Jet black, pointed ears with a build like a German Shepherd, and these jet black eyes that weren't glowing in the light like a dog's eyes should. It was staring at me. We made eye contact. I was frozen with fear. I built up the nerve to pinch myself, thinking I was having a nightmare. I was definitely awake. I reacted to the pain and the dog moved. It was reacting to me. I was beyond terrified. I muttered, "What do you want?" And it began slowly walking into my room. I screamed and heard my brother jump out of his bed, his door flying open. The dog looked that way and wheeled around into the storage room. Almost out of sight. My brother came into my room and the dog backed out of sight. I had my brother check the room but he found nothing. Fast forward almost a decade, and a friend and I were out hunting coyotes in the neighbor's property. My buddy and I ate chatting. It was a slow day. Suddenly my friend's face goes white. He is super focused on the woods on the hill across from us, about 300 or so yards off. He slowly pulled his scope up and swallowed hard. I asked what was up, and he asked, "Ever seen an all-black coyote?" I said, "Sure, but only on the internet. This one's different. I don't know, man. It's like he's staring at my eyes through the scope." I kind of chuckled. "Whatever, dude, let's check this guy out," I said, pulling up my scope. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe it. It was the dog, and he was staring at us. The moment I found him in the scope he sat and stared. I can't explain it, but it felt so wrong. Then he just walked off. We thought about leaving but were too intrigued. I told my friend about what happened all those years ago. As a kid I assumed it was a dog. Now, it just seems so generic. Like I remembered, but not a dog, coyote, or wolf. I just can't put my finger on it, and neither could my friend. We spent our entire lives in the outdoors, hunting, hiking, etc. As it got dark we made the long trek back through the snow. As we were walking my friend said, "WTF. There, up ahead, sat the black dog." We named him that after the movie. Later I learned the history of the black dog online. Gad, we known we wouldn't have been so careless. We shined a light on him, and his eyes, they didn't glow. They should have glowed. He stood up, stared at us, and slowly walked off. He was kind of always around. He would show his face from time to time. Bad stuff would always happen, accidents, injuries, and even deaths. I wish I was making this up. I swear I'm not. It's been experienced by a few others with me. The last experience was 2020, and I now live almost 30 minutes drive from where I had last seen the black dog years before. I'm driving home from work on third shift. I'm tired, and work was stressful. I had been hit by a truck and hurt pretty badly about 2 weeks before, was involved in a separate car accident, and my grandfather was dying slowly. I was thinking about it all, and I got that all too familiar chill. How could I be being watched, in a moving vehicle? I looked into the field beside the road and there he was. Running. This made my heart near stop. The black dog legend is that truckers would see the dog and death would normally follow. Later that day I was advised of my grandfather passing away, around the time I saw the dog. That cemented it in my mind that this was real. I always made excuses for the things I saw and experienced. The people around me when these things happened did not take it so lightly. May not the creepiest thing I've seen, but definitely the oddest, odd, and scary enough to one friend, that he will never return to my parents' home. Who knows, there is probably still an explanation. Not as spooky as some of these. Halloween 2019. My wife and I stay at the old Ottawa Jail Hostel in Ottawa, Ontario. It is supposedly haunted and we're into that kind of thing, so we stayed the night. I woke up many times through the night hearing what sounded like a guard dragging his baton along the cell bars. Now that could have been 100 different things in an old building making that noise, and it being an old jail that still has cell doors, my mind would reasonably jump to that conclusion. Then my alarm went off in the morning, and I, still being tired, asked my wife if she wanted to sleep a bit longer. She agreed, so we set a timer on my phone for 30 minutes and laid back down. I was awakened by my cell phone landing on me, as if it was thrown. I picked up my phone to see that there was less than 10 seconds before the timer was to go off, so I feel like my phone was thrown at me because someone or something didn't want to hear the alarm noise again. Overall 8 dents would stay there again. Highly recommend if you like spooky shit and history. Something sitting on my bed late at night. Also something exercising my leg after I tore my leg muscles. I was almost asleep feeling my leg moving up and down. This was after I said I was too tired after work to do it myself earlier that day. When the building I work in was being built, a man was killed on site. He haunts the building. A few years ago, I was alone in my classroom and I kept hearing door handles move up and down. There are 3 doors to the classroom and I kept looking at each one. 2 of them have large windows, so there was no one there. Then the paper towel dispenser kept going off on its own. Back to the door handles. I then heard my name being whispered loudly, followed by whispered words I couldn't quite comprehend. I thought someone had opened a door to talk to me, so I loudly said, "What do you want?" But no one was there. This went on for almost an hour until I finally said, "It was fun while it lasted. You can please stop." It happened again a few more times, but it stopped. He has also been known to open doors, slam doors, move chairs, all kinds of things. He's not malevolent, just makes noise at the worst times. This happened when I was a kid. My family had to drive to the hospital at night since my heart monitor and stuff. I realized that there was a creepy van next to us. I looked at it and I heard screaming and crying from there. My dad called the police. Somebody was kidnapped. I was in the void between sleep and no sleep. Totally aware of my surroundings but well chilled, and my mind was wandering. I suddenly realized I could hear static outside my mind. I stopped my thoughts and listened. Clearly static, not in my head, but also not anywhere else. It was kind of like I could control it with my mind, and I started rolling through different stations. They were people's conversations and I heard weird grabs of different unknown voices before the station would change again. It stopped suddenly. I lay there for the longest time trying to figure it out before I actually went to sleep. Never happened again. Before I knew what it was, and it is actually pretty normal, sleep paralysis. For a few years I was too afraid to talk about it, and I was convinced I was cursed by an evil demon. I was also like 12, feeling awake and not being able to move is one of the most frightening things I have ever experienced. Luckily now, I know what is up and I just try to talk really loud and move and kick until I start to make some noise and can move a little. After that I get fully awake pretty soon. Alright, this is a story I have told basically nobody in my life, and even less who believed it. But let me tell you a tale of the first few months of a house I lived in once upon a time. Some of you will think I'm making this up or I'm crazy, but I don't much care. I can assure you I'm not a creative enough person to just conjure up a story like this, lol. This will probably wind up being a long read, but in my opinion worth it. Right off the bat, I should mention I am fairly skeptical of paranormal stuff. I never completely discredited it, but generally I would consider a logical explanation before jumping to conclusions. Even after all this I still do, however there are some things here I just can't explain. Anyways, I used to live with a girlfriend, in the basement of their family home. I won't get into details, but as I understand it some fairly bad things had happened there. They rented it out to some people before myself and my girlfriend moved in. The plan was for her mom and brother to move back in upstairs a month later, which is exactly what happens. From the first day we moved in there was sort of a weird energy of the place. Even the house itself was kind of odd. It was an older 4-tiered split-level house, so essentially 2 stories, but split by 3 sets of half stairwells. It wasn't well maintained, and we had a lot of work to do. The upper level of our basement suite was one big room, with a kitchenette and a living room, and our bathroom. The lowest level was a storage room with a hot water tank, the laundry room, a ground-level exit to the backyard, and in the very back was our room. The lowest level had concrete floors, beat-up walls which were painted black and red, and was relatively unfinished. The exception was our bedroom, which had hardwood floors. The weirdness started when I kept noticing the storage room light was on. There was no door, and seemingly more often than not I'd walk by it would be on. I wouldn't think much of it, and just flick it off on my way by. However, it was so frequent it got to the point where I brought it up. Nobody said they had been in there recently, and generally we were all good about power usage. It was weird that a storage room which is rarely ever ventured into constantly had the light turned on. My girlfriend swore she wasn't the one leaving it on, as well as her brother and mom who we shared the laundry room with, which was across the hall from the storage. It just kept happening, and I obviously just assumed someone was just for some reason fixated on turning this light on and leaving it on. One time my GF and her brother and mother left town for a couple days, so I was at the house by myself. And literally every time I would walk by this room, the light was on. I was freaked out a little, I'm not going to lie, but I convinced myself it must be some sort of wiring issue, that is, until I realized that every time I walked by I would flick the light switch downward, with the same downward hand motion every single time. Meaning that the switch was physically being pushed up. This, I had no explanation for. It was just weird. During all this time, there were 2 other occurrences which often happened. One was the TV. It had a tendency to turn on to static very often. This was in about 2010 and we had a newer TV, so it seemed a bit odd that it would just turn itself on and be static. If I turned it on myself it would always be on the last channel I had it on, but many times I would come home from work, or wake up and it would have just turned itself on to static. Weird, but again, I always came up with some sort of explanation. Even though I had none, the other occurrence was the cupboards. They just opened themselves all the time. Well, must be out of level or something, I told myself. Though whenever I tested this theory they would stay shut. Something I noticed a few times, but never brought up with my girlfriend, was hearing very odd-paced footsteps upstairs. Very faint, but I could hear it. Sometimes it was when the family was home and upstairs, but again, very odd and slow, deliberate and perfectly spaced out timing-wise. Not the typical sounds of someone walking around upstairs, and not nearly loud enough. One time I heard them going up and down the stairs repeatedly for a bit when nobody was home, so I went upstairs to investigate and sure enough nobody was there. Now, here's the night it got crazy. My girlfriend and I were in our living room watching TV late at night. Nobody was home upstairs. Brother was out with his friends, mom was somewhere, I don't recall. It's about 1030 or 11. All of a sudden we hear a big crash up there, and we both freak out a bit. I grabbed the first improvised weapon I can find, a wine bottle, and work up the courage to go investigate, my GF behind me. There was nobody there, however they had a wall-mounted sort of basket-hanging shelf thingy, for lack of better terminology, which was used to hold things like keys, gloves, perfume, whatever. An assortment of things her mother had in it. It was on the floor, and everything in it was strewn across the room. All the way across the room. Obviously I thought it had just fallen under the weight of itself, until I went to go put it back in. The nail that held it in, which was found on the ground as well, was placed into the drywall at a 45 degrees downward angle. There was no bend in the screw or damage to the drywall like there would be if it had succumbed to the weight of itself. The nail had been physically pulled out of the wall. With this sort of evidence, we both start to feel very freaked out. We were both somewhat tormented by these odd occurrences over the last few months that seemed to become more frequent. We thought we might be losing it. We decide maybe it's time for bed, so we do just that. Around 3 a.m., we both, at the exact same time, jolt awake into a sitting position and gasp. There, at the foot of the bed, is the silhouette of a tall man, in a duster coat and a brimmed hat. He's gone as soon as I can see him, But my girlfriend is crying and all she said is, "Did you see him?" I said yes. We held each other and didn't say a word. Eventually we both fell back asleep. The next morning I said out loud something to the effect of, "This may have been your home in the past, but it's our home now and we are going to have to coexist together." After that night, there was nothing. No light switches, no static, no sounds. No odd feeling even. It was just a normal house. We never really talked about any of this. I never told anyone. Until once at work the topic of paranormal stuff came up and I reluctantly told the story, feeling like an insane person. After I mentioned the figure we both saw, my coworker says, "Oh, the Hat Man." "The Hat Man?" "Yeah, the Hat Man. It's a really common spirit that a lot of people claim to see." Sure as shit I look up the Hat Man. I'm not going to get into the whole lore behind it, but if you are interested, Google will surely be of use. Now again, I'm sure most of you won't believe me or think I'm making this up, or that I truly do believe it and am crazy. I really don't care, lol. It happened, and it's something I've told very, very few people about. I still have a rather skeptical mind, but perhaps after all that a bit less of one. Entities exist which we don't fully understand, I have no doubt about that. This was one of those experiences I can't explain, and frankly if I go the rest of my life without having any more I'd be fine with that. I saw a UFO once when I was younger. It was a super bright light in the sky that remained completely motionless. However, every few minutes it would dart across the sky much faster than any plane I've seen from the ground. I watched it for maybe half an hour with my family before leaving, so I don't know what happened to it. Not me, but one of my closest friends swears to hell that he was gathered around campfire with a group of friends, and the whole lot of them saw a multiple-legged horse form in the fire. He's a pretty hardcore pagan though and has been known to stretch the truth, so I don't quite believe him. Lots more than 4 legs. When I was 12 I had a dream at night of a white church with a very tall steeple. I was looking at it and suddenly the steeple was adorned with a gigantic black bow. The next morning my mom was making breakfast and I asked where Dad was. She said Grandma, his mother, died during the night and he'd gone to Pennsylvania too early to be with Grandpa. When I was in high school I would always join my mom when she would visit my stepdad's sister. She lived in a trailer with an old, lazy and super friendly pit bull. On one of those visits my aunt asked me if I wanted to dog/house sit for a week while she was away. It happened to fall during a 2-week break from school for me, so I accepted, and soon I had my own place with a chill dog for myself for a week. The layout of the trailer goes like this: walk through the front door, walk through a short little hall into the kitchen/dining room. Immediately to the right of the end of that hall and right again is a door to a bathroom that is connected by another door to a room adjacent to the dining room. The dining room had a table with 4 chairs around it and a little ceramic bowl to hold odds and ends on the table. There were also 2 cupboards full of old china. One night I'm laying on the bed in the room with the bathroom and I'm watching TV. At some point toward later in the night I go into the bathroom through the door in the room and sit on the toilet. I'm doing what you do when you sit on a toilet when all of a sudden I hear and feel what seems to be the front door crashing open and slamming against the wall behind me. I hear heavy boots making themselves known down the little hall and taking a right into the dining room. I'm watching the other door in the bathroom that opens to the dining room and seeing the shadows of movement from underneath the door. I hear something like some keys being thrown at and shattering the ceramic bowl on the table. I heard heavy footsteps circle the table while the chairs are being knocked around and banging on the cupboards, and then more urgent stomping immediately followed by silence. I am still on the toilet at this point and I am positive that I am about to die. I've never been so terrified in my life. I legitimately thought that someone had just broken in and I was in the most vulnerable position imaginable while I tried my hardest to not make a noise or move. I remember just sitting there waiting for the opposite door to fling itself against its hinges, thinking it would be the last thing I saw. I remember waiting for what seemed like an eternity in complete silence before I got the nerve to finish up, stand up and brace myself to open the door. When I do open the door, I'm greeted by the familiar sight of the kitchen and dining room just as I had left it. I have never been more frightened or confused than I was on the night. I remember how vivid in the other room the footsteps and sounds felt like. I remember the crashes and panic tension. The other confusing bit is that the dog didn't make a noise at all, but I found him in the corner of the room under the bed and against the wall. I still have no explanation for that night to this day. That is just one of many things to happen to me or a close family member now that I'm sitting here and thinking about this. I knew someone who got a really bad nosebleed in the middle of the night as a young child. Their family all went to the hospital, and when they came back they found there had been a gas leak. If they hadn't been woken by the nosebleed they would have all died. I was en route home from a 12-day vacation, driving a pickup pulling a fifth-wheel RV. It was about 11 p.m. on a Saturday night in late July, and I was about 2 hours from home, trying to make it home yet that night. I was in a very rural area where there is almost no one living on about a 20-mile stretch of road. There is only one combination gas station / tavern / motel on here, and it's heavily wooded on both sides. It is county maintained and fenced at the tree line. The shallow ditches had been mowed and the grass was about 6 inches high. I only saw a couple of cars on this whole stretch of road. I was going only about 50 miles per hour because it is heavily populated with deer. I saw movement ahead, so I immediately slowed more. As I passed I saw it was a young woman. Tall, fit brunette, wearing a crop top, pleated skirt and stockings. Walking with the traffic, just off of the shoulder. I immediately thought car trouble, though I had not passed a disabled car, or fight with boyfriend / driver, and was put out. I pulled to the side of the road, hit the emergency flashers and grabbed the flashlight to check on her. When I got to the rear of the camper, there was no one. I looked around for her. There was no way she would have reached the back of the RV before I did, so she could not have been hiding there. She could not have hid in the ditches as the grass was too short. She could not have made it to and over the fence without a light in the little time it took me to get to the rear of the RV. I looked where she had been walking and I saw no sign that the dew on the grass had been disturbed. I drove the rest of the way home with the hair on the back of my neck standing on end. Was around 6 at the time. It was Chinese New Year. Me and my family were driving back to our home where some relatives were waiting for us. One of my uncles passed away recently, but I was too young to know anything about death. We went about greeting each other and then I was shaking hand with the uncle that passed away. My parents were creeped out because I was shaking hands with the air. Seemed like I was the only one who could see him. I saw a shadow person. I've shared this story before, but when I was 17 I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. It was a pretty old building in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, and according to his dad it used to be owned by Al Capone, but I'm not sure how true that was. We had an apartment on the top floor that they let us use to just hang out, and it allowed us easy access to the attic. It had a lock but we had a key, so we could go out to the roof and smoke cigarettes. One night, we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went up the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. We had those old flip phones without lights, so you only had the light from the screen to help navigate the cluttered mess that was up there. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. Now this wasn't like the shadow of something moving with the light of my phone. This shadow felt solid like a person. I followed the direction it went thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times, before heading to the other side of the attic, and that's when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. It really freaked me out, since I know I was following something, so I basically jumped down the stairs. I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there, and he agreed, so we decided to go for a walk instead. Lived in my parents' shop. One of the cabinets where the tools were would always have an open door when I got home from work. I got tired of closing it every day, so I took it off the hinges. 2 days later a tool from a different cabinet fell out and smashed my PlayStation. Put cabinet door back on and continued to close it every day for the next 2 years till I moved out. My family owns a cabin deep in one of the boonies of PA. Potter County, to be exact. I have had a few strange experiences in the many years we've been going there for vacations. When I was about 6 to 7, I was trying to fall asleep on an air mattress in my parents' bedroom. It was probably about 11 or 12 at night, when suddenly a glowing orb appeared on the side of my dad's bed. It stayed still for a second, then suddenly started dancing around. I didn't know what to make of it, so I just turned over to the other side and fell asleep. Lol. I woke up later that night to find it gone, and I haven't seen it since. A few years later, it was broad daylight, and I was alone in my parents' room, doing nothing in particular. Out of nowhere, a female voice whispered my name, right in my ear. Again, I didn't know what to make of it, so I left the room to make sure nobody had called for me or anything, and everyone else was just minding their own business. No one was paying me any mind. Once I was a teenager, I decided to stop sleeping in that room. I didn't want any more creepy things happening, and my dad's monstrous snoring didn't help motivate me either, lol. But it wasn't just the room that was haunted. My entire family has discovered that the whole area has some strange energies residing in it. My dad has seen the face of a dead relative appear in the fireplace. My brother and cousin have seen multiple orbs in a nearby field. Another cousin saw an unexplained flash of light in the corner of her bedroom once. There is an entire book dedicated to weird and paranormal stuff that's been going on for decades in Potter County. So far, the last weird thing that happened was a couple of years ago. I woke up in the middle of the night, sleeping on the living room couch this time, to see a few tiny, flashing lights appear at random around the room. They were like, pinpoint size, but they still freak me out. Especially since my dog was obviously scared of them, too, given the fact that she was whining in fear, and they couldn't have been fireflies or anything, because it was autumn, and the light they gave off didn't look anything like a firefly's. Those are my stories, and I'm sticking to them. After going to a wake for a friend that had passed away from cancer, I was staying the night at another friend's house to go to the funeral the next day. The friend who passed away had been a nurse, and was the most kind and caring person, and would always made sure that people were comfortable and cared for. I was sleeping in the guest room and woke up when I had a feeling like someone was standing by the bed. I was a little freaked out, but I closed my eyes to fall back asleep, and that's when I felt like someone tucking me in and softly touching the top of my head. I just knew it was her. When I told my friend about it the next morning, she said she felt like someone had been in her room too. When I started at a well-known theater school in my country, they warned us that the building that the main theater was in was haunted. We all kind of laughed it off because haha, let's scare the first years, and got on with our studies. The main theater building was one of those really old stone buildings that the city was known for, and it was a little spooky, but I never really thought of it until one night my classmate and I were the last two in the building and were getting ready to lock up. I heard what sounded like someone walking on one of the catwalks, and looked up. There was a man in a red trench coat, and we made eye contact, and there was just something wrong about his face. Like it wasn't anything dramatic, maybe his smile was too wide, or it was just the fact that he was smiling. Either way, it got 10 times creepier because he immediately started running down the stairs to the ground while still smiling. My classmate grabbed my arm and we both ran out of the theater as fast as possible. We closed the steel backstage door, and as we were locking it, something heavy slammed into it on the other side. We hurried outside, and once we were in the car we both realized we had seen the same thing. When we were telling our teacher that there had been a man in the catwalk the next day, he got really quiet and asked us if it was the smiling man in a red trench coat. We said yes, and our teacher told us that apparently he was one of the more violent ghosts, and other students had had things thrown at them, or once someone got hit in the back of the head even though they were the only ones in the theater. This happened to me only a few days ago. I was doing garden work and had to use my set of kitchen scales to measure out some fertilizer. Anyways, I took the scales back into the kitchen and put it on the bench. Job done, and went into my computer room and heard a crash, and the scales were on the floor a good meter away from the bench. It's a square, so there was no way it could have rolled that far. I have a cat, but she was in the computer room with me. I have seen shit in my house, but it has never been threatening, and I have never been scared. When my wife was pregnant with our second child, I felt a hand grab my foot in the middle of the night. I knew it wasn't anybody in the house because we were all sleeping. I just figured it was the spirit of our unborn child saying hi to me. About 9 months ago I was sleeping and received a rather hard flick on my right ear. It woke me up. Nobody around me, but I knew I needed to get up. Went to check on the toddler, and he had wiggled in a way that he put a pillow over his face. I immediately pulled the pillow off him and touched him to see if he was breathing. He was. My wife has all kinds of stuff happen to her. She knew that my brother had a second child with someone else when nobody said a word to us. My parents knew but were keeping it a secret from us. He was still married to his ex at the time and had basically been cheating on her since she was pregnant with their child. There's more, but I'd have to think, and it's Friday night and I'm not in the mood for that. I used to work for a networking company that makes very high-end products for the high-end home market. Think people who have multiple 40U racks in their basement. One day I sent one of my marketing team members to accompany a sales rep as they did their rounds in the field to meet with systems integrators. They visited with one of systems integrators who wanted them to come with them to visit a particular customer who have been having problems with our equipment. Apparently this customer had to replace some of our equipment 3 times. The integrator was implying that our equipment was at fault, and that we made shitty products. We had a generous return policy and took the failed equipment back each time. At the high-end market, when someone has a problem the integrators can't solve, we would fly a tech out to the site to fix it. So they visit this house, or rather mansion, and they find out that it's not just our equipment that has been failing. Apparently other electronics equipment had also been failing too, which the integrator never told us about. A few questions later and it was revealed that there have been unusual electrical surges. A few more questions later, and we learned that the house was built on an old Indian burial ground. That was the last time we replaced a failed unit for that customer. Premonition/deja vu. I would dream of innocuous things: going through a door, buying a snack, playing a game, seeing an animal. Happen once a week or two and never serious. Started to write them down and date them because no one believed me. I also thought I was a mutant, X-Men style. One day I got asked to help move a bookcase and I said nope. Dreamed a book will fall. Don't want to get hit. They grabbed someone else and went to move the bookcase. Giant ass book flies off the shelf and slams to the floor. No one still believes me because the other guy didn't get hurt. He leaned right where I would normally lean left when lifting. Nothing ever was very serious and most of the time could have been waved away as a self-fulfilling prophecy, but I still wrote them down constantly. They finally petered out and have mostly stopped. Still occasionally get one, but it's always months or a full year in between dreams, but it never stops being jarring when it does happen. My father passed away several years ago. On the night of his passing I had a dream where he was telling me to take care of Mom. He was very specific to a point where he told me how to turn off the water in case of a leak, where the key to the safe was, and several other things. I told my sister, who arrived from out of state, and she started finishing my sentences. She had the same dream. My brother came in from abroad, as did another sister. We all had the same dream and instructions. After the funeral I received several additional visits, I presume because I lived the closest to Mom. After Mom passed away, never had any more. I think something has followed me for a while. I'd how much I believe in it or take it seriously, but I've had weird things happen. As a kid I'd hear footsteps outside my room or the house when everyone should be asleep or they were gone. In multiple houses as an adult my mates or just me would hear voices, door close, etc. Lately I've seen a couple doors open by themselves. I also saw what looked like a shadow on my stairs on my way through. I don't get scared, it's always just like, yeah that's weird, but could be anything. The night before the Challenger accident I dreamt that the lower SRB bracket was cut through by a jet of flame from the SRB, causing the craft to rotate, causing failure of the mission. Real life it didn't rotate, it jawed. I took them about 2 years to figure this out and release the report. So the door opens and closes on its own sometimes in my old house, and one day I was laying in bed but was too lazy to get up and close the door, so I just said, "Hey, could you close the door?" The door was still for a second, then it closed on its own. This either means I can speak to ghosts or Avastan. When I was in about the 4th grade I remember falling asleep on the couch, and waking up to the feeling of the couch moving like somebody was sitting down on it, and when I looked nobody was there, but the cushion was depressed like when you sit on it. Also, same house, I remember waking up in the middle of the night to go to the kitchen and turning a corner and the tree we had was shaking so hard leaves were falling off of it. I had terrible night terrors in that house, and used to swear something was in my closet. I never had night terrors before living there or after. I used to do historical reenacting French and Indian War period, about 35 to 45 years before the U.S. Revolutionary War. I live in and did most of my events in the Ohio Valley/Great Lakes area, including events at a historic fort in NW, Ohio. Great site, always fun events. Anyway, although public hours usually ended around sunset, most people camped on site in mostly historically accurate encampments, i.e. canvas tents, period clothing, but with some modern benefits. After hours, people mostly hang out around fires, chat, and so on. One of the nicer things about this site was the presence of actual modern bathrooms, camouflaged in one of the blockhouses. Little after midnight, I decided an excursion was necessary and headed to the restrooms, which were at the far end of the fort from where we were camped. Walked there, no issues, did the usual, and started walking back. Got maybe 20 feet along and got the strongest feeling someone was right behind me, watching me. Y'all know how this goes. Turned around, No one there, and nowhere anyone could have hidden in time. Turned back around, started walking again. Didn't get much further when the feeling returned, only this time I was definitely being followed. Quickly spun around. Nope, I was getting a bit wary, so I detoured into the next blockhouse, which had lighted display area in it. Figured I'd try waiting whoever it was out. Waited. Nothing. Stepped back out, took a long, sweeping look around, no one in sight. Everyone's grouped around their own fires, and there's no one else anywhere near me walking around. Started back again. Feeling came right back. Decided at this point to just hurry up and get back to our camp. No problem, I just sat down and didn't say anything about it at the time. Next morning, though, somebody else said something that made me tell a few people I was sitting with. General consensus was I confused the heck out of a sentry. Then a good friend mentioned that the staff at the fort had just recently been doing some excavation in another part of the fort and discovered some remains dating back to the 1812 era. I then had it explained that incidents happen to reenactors fairly often. Most seem to think we tend to confuse them. If you believe in that sort of thing, I'm fairly skeptical, but I certainly don't rule out the possibility of ghosts and hauntings and the like. But I'll swear till my dying day somebody was following me that night. Believe what you will. I was at my mother's, divorced parents, when my paternal grandmother died. I was flying out the next day for the funeral. My grandmother was paralyzed and unable to speak my entire life. Had a dream that didn't feel like a dream, where she was able to tell me she loved for the first time in my life. She hugged me and then disappeared. To this day I know it wasn't a dream. My ex and I saw a shadowy figure in his basement. We then ran up the stairs, grabbed some knives and hid in the kitchen thinking it was a burglar. We crept into the basement a few minutes later scared to death and found nothing out of the ordinary. I described to him what I saw and he described the exact same image. We agreed that the shadowy figure was a tall man dramatically swaying his shoulders from side to side as he rapidly approached us. Oh, and as we were having this conversation, the blinds began to shake vigorously. At that moment we both decided that ghosts were real. Moved into a new house around age 12 to 13. Saw shadow people every so often for the first year or so I lived there. Usually walking up the back walk into the porch or going up the stairs to the second floor. Arrived at work one morning, around 6 a.m. As I walked past an empty cubicle, I saw a black, wispy humanoid shape dart into one of the cubicle's panels. It happened so fast, I almost dismissed it. Whatever it was shorter than me. I asked a co-worker about it and he said someone who had sadly passed was thought to hang around our office and yes, he was short in stature. I went to visit my uncle's marijuana farm legal out of state with my husband. The land had multiple houses/places for workers to trim and sleep, basically they live there while working. On my third day there, two of the female workers that had been sharing a room completely freaked out. One of them claimed that a blonde pale woman was standing outside their window, just staring blankly inside with her eyes wide and her head cocked to the side. Everybody at the farm had dark hair. She apparently was so scared that she kept squeezing her eyes shut and reopening to see the blonde woman still there, but her face was cocked in a different direction at every blink, so she ran out, leaving her roommate who was asleep. The roommate said she had a terrible nightmare of herself getting molested and beaten and woke up to bruises all over her body. I remember seeing everybody looking at her in disbelief because she seriously had small bruises all over her arms and legs. People were telling her that she had a bad trip, but she was crying and begging to be taken to the hospital, so the person who hired her took her. She never came back for her things. Once she was medically cleared, she called family to pick her up. Our last night at the farm was our fifth night. We were preparing to leave the farm and it was dark out. For some reason my husband had left my side to look for my uncle, and my aunt and cousin had disappeared into the dark. In one of the barns with light I saw my cousin walking into the building, so I went to let him know we were leaving. I get in there and there's nobody. I walk through the barn and exited on the other side, and I see my husband standing next to my cousin by her car. We get to my uncle's house and he wanted to do a small barbecue for our last night visiting him, and there he tells us about all the ghost stories from his farm and stuff he's personally seen. But the thing that creeped me out the most was that poor girl with the bruises, you know? When they started passing the joint around I skipped it and decided to sleep first. You know that feeling when something's brushing on your leg but you're too tired to swat it away? Yeah, I thought maybe there was a spider or something under the blanket, so I was like, F that, I'm tired as SHT, I'll deal with you tomorrow, spider. Then as I drift off into sleep, the bed shook, literally felt like somebody was at the foot of the bed rocking the mattress. Instantly I opened my eyes. Stupid move. The room was pitch black, but I could make out a silhouette standing by the desk. Nope. My husband was sleeping next to me facing the wall, so I casually rolled over him and kept my eyes shut. I'm now between my husband and the wall, and my heart is beating like crazy for the first time in a long time while in a bed. I could feel it staring at me, and it felt as if all the hairs on my arms and neck was up, like my body was on high alert. This went on for what seemed like forever, and I tried to force myself to sleep. Every time I would start to doze off, the foot of the bed would rock and I'd mentally be awake again. Never once would I open my eyes because there's been too many scary movies where something's in your face. Then, I heard my husband whisper my name, "Hey Tia Leaves," and I opened my eyes and thought, WTH, he has been awake the whole time? Nope. That was a trap, cause my husband was still snoring beside me. That's when I saw a figure above us and my ears started to ring, so I balled up in a fetal position until morning time. When my husband woke up, he told me he had a scary dream that he was being chased at my uncle's farm by a wailing woman. We packed up our stuff and went home without looking back. Once we finally got home, I stripped my clothes off to shower, and before getting in my husband stopped me and told me to look in the mirror. I had small bruises on my arms and legs. I am not into religion, the supernatural or paranormal, but several years ago, I was driving along a road, on a weekend afternoon, not tired, not sleepy. I don't do drugs, and never have done, and don't drink or smoke. It was the A13 in Essex, UK, a multi-lane highway. I went over a flyover, over the Tilbury Docks turnoff. Carried on driving another 5 kilometers, past the exit to Grays, and the point where traffic from the Lakeside shopping mall joins the road. The journey was uneventful, and I think I was driving carefully and steadily, a decent distance from the same car and from, all the way. I went over the A13 flyover over the M25 motorway, and found myself back 5 kilometers, having just crossed the Tilbury Docks turnoff behind the same car. I have told this story multiple times and people have made several suggestions, such as second-hand smoke from drug user, unlikely as I had just come from my parents' house, carbon monoxide from the exhaust. I had the same car for years, never had a problem, before or after, micro sleep. I never experienced that before or after, and it was mid/late afternoon. I wasn't tired. I was shocked by the experience, literally shocked, almost driving on autopilot after the event, too shocked to think about checking the time or distance on the car, or changing my driving pattern. The only other car I was paying attention to, in front of me, was the same one for both iterations of the journey. The time difference would have been about 3 minutes, out of an approximately 90-minute journey, so not enough to make a difference to my overall journey time. I can't prove anything, and I don't care if people believe me. It happened and I can't think of a reasonable explanation. A couple months ago, I was going to bed, and as my head hit the pillow, I had a feeling of falling uncontrollably while spinning backwards in the air. It felt very strange, but I ignored it and went to bed. Next day I told my mom, and she said she felt the exact same way last night at about the same time. Later on we found out my father, who I have never met in my life, passed away that night. I was 14 when my dad died. He had been sick with cancer for about 2 years before he passed and practically wasted away. Around 3 months after his death, I was at work, wiping down the counter which was a few meters from the front door. For some reason I glanced up and he was leaning against the door smiling at me. He looked healthy and happy and at peace. Before I even comprehended what I saw, I looked back down to what I was doing, then realized and looked back up, but he was gone. This happened in a space of a few seconds, but I saw him as clear as day. This 20 years ago, but that memory is still so clear. This isn't all that creepy to me, it's more heartwarming for me, but it is paranormal, and I was like 10 at the time. I swear to God, this woman is either a very kind spirit or my guardian angel. When I was younger, and still to this day, I can hear a woman's voice telling me things, but most commonly saying my name. Before the event below happened, I always asked my mom if she said something, but she always said no. I woke up around 2:30 a.m. to find a woman who had brown hair and curls, deep brown eyes, wore a dress that looked as if it were from 1800s, 1900s, and she had pale skin. Her face didn't wear a mask of anger but of kindness. I blinked my eyes a few times to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but I wasn't. I was very much awake. The woman looked at me and smiled. She tilted her head to one side and said, "Rest, child." She then turned left and walked through my wall. I soon fell asleep afterwards. I fell asleep at like 3 a.m. Now to this day, I always hear a woman's voice, her voice, telling me things like "be careful" and "welcome home." I'm glad it's her who is haunting me than any other spirit. Girlfriend's old house had some weird stuff. We all had experiences and are pretty sure the spirit or whatever was a female, to name a few, standing on the back patio with 6 or 7 people, having some drinks, talking about her. All of a sudden, the hanging plants in the kitchen begin violently swinging. We all turn our heads to look, and as we do, we hear what sounded like plates being smashed behind us, off in the darkness. There was no wind or open windows to explain it. No broken glass or plates in the yard. I'd walked into the empty house one day looking for my girlfriend. It was around noon. House felt eerie. Walking down the hallway and the light above my head begins flickering. I walk into the living room and the white door that leads to their shoe room was left open. As I take note of it, it slammed shut. Freaked me out. Laying in bed, must have been 2 or 3 a.m. Felt like someone was whispering to me, but not like they were next to me. It was like the whispering was in my head. I woke up, felt a real cold draft come down my neck and chest. Looked over and saw a figure pulling clothes out of the bottom drawer on the dresser. As my GF would always do, I told it to come to bed. It stood up and walked away from me towards the window. Then turned and went into the closet. I got up to follow, and as I got close to the closet, I got this overwhelming sense of dread, or fear, and felt as though I should not look in that closet. Turned around and went back to bed. GF was freaked out by that one. Also been partying and having a fire out back. Saw a female figure watching us from the house. Yelled at her, and she turned around and walked away. Got up, ran after her, and she had disappeared. Nowhere to be found. Sometimes you'd wake up and your clothes that were left in a pile next to the bed would be damp and smell like death. It was weird. Was called and invited to play poker with some buddies. I got my shoes on, hopped in the car, got some gas and a drink and headed to my friend's house. The whole trip lasted maybe 15 minutes. When I get there, everyone's kinda just sitting around. I'm like, "Okay, we gonna play?" They tell me they already did. They had called me 3 hours ago. I have no clue where that time went. Whilst refurbishing our new house before moved in, I had to answer the door to one of the daughters of the previous owner. She wanted to pick up some mail. I invited her into the kitchen, which had just had new units and flooring fitted. She was a bit taken back at the speed in which I'd ripped the house apart, I think. Anyway, I grabbed her mail off the side and gave it to her, and we walked out of the house. When I walked back into the kitchen, there was an old family photo in the middle of the floor. Don't know who it was or where it came from, but it wasn't there until that girl knocked on the door. I later found out the previous owner's husband had died at the bottom of the stairs. Anyway, a few years pass and my 3-year-old tells us she saw a man called Peter on the stairs. I've written about this in another answer. This happened a few years ago. I've shifted houses since then. My mom, sister and I were at home, and it was like 7 in the evening. Late winter evenings, so it got dark soon. Here, we were living in a flat, on the 4th floor. So the layout was basically, in the hall, on the left you had the wash basin, and my room beside it, and on the right was my parents' room. So it's 7 in the evening, and I'm in my room, and there's some problem and the electricity went off suddenly and it turned really dark. Now we had to go out, so I had picked out clothes and they were in my left hand. I'm calling out to my sister and mom to get the phone or flashlight, anything. No one replies, so I walk out of the room and I'm touching the wash basin. You know how you hold on to something if it's dark. I am calling someone out to bring the phone. My left hand has the clothes and is also holding the basin. Now suddenly, I feel my sister's hand sort of trace my right arm and interlock with my fingers. The weird thing here was that she wasn't replying, so I'm blabbering. I could feel myself continuously talking, but not able to stop telling her, "Why are you holding me? Get the phone, I need to change, why aren't you replying, we'll get late." I'm saying all this, over and over. She holds my hand for a good 1 minute and I'm blabbering the entire time. Now she suddenly lets go, and the next second, the lights switch back on. There is no one around me, and my mom's room is pretty far. I mean, no one can walk into a room in the split second the light switched on. My mom and sister walk out of there, all concerned, asking me what I was saying, and how they were yelling over and over that they're trying to look for a phone/flashlight. When I was blabbering with the hand, it was silent. It didn't even seem someone was in the house with me. I thought it was a prank. I was terrified, and they swore they were in the room the entire time, together, and hadn't walked out in the hall, even once. Every time when I want to go to another place, and when I going to that place by road, there's somebody who won the another place, and when he going, he literally just go before a green. And another, one time I'm wake up at night and literally nobody in the house, only me. Sorry for bad English. I dreamt that my teacher died some years back. Told my friend about it before getting in the car to go to school. 10 minutes after class started, I got a message on the phone, and it was my friend. All he wrote was, "Sometimes you are disgusting." Then the principal came in and said that the teacher in my dream had died. My friend told the principal about my dream, and they sent me home because I was shocked. Not even a little bit religious, but here comes the weirdest part. He was my religion teacher and knew I found it fascinating. We had a conversation a week before about it, and the last thing he said was, "Maybe I will show it to you one day." I still can't explain it. But he was a very kind man. It wasn't scary, but not normal either. A few years ago, my grandma's health declined rapidly. She was taken to hospital by my grandpa, my uncle, aunt, and my dad. Since my grandparents live with my aunt, we took in my cousins for the night. One of them was 6, the youngest, and had never slept in a house that wasn't his. He slept in my room on a sleeping bag, not being mean, but he used to roll on his sleep and fall from beds, haha. I'm not sure about the hour, probably like 4 a.m. I heard a voice calling my name in a hurried way, like trying to wake me up. My first thought was that it was my cousin. Maybe he woke up disoriented, as it wasn't his room. I woke up to see him sound asleep, like a baby, kid you not. Some seconds later the phone rang and my mom answered. Later I found that it was the moment he informed that my grandma had passed. I guess she came to say goodbye. This past October I went with some family members to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Now we live pretty close, and I've been going there every year for about 20 years. Never any creepy smells, sounds, never seen a ghost, no weird feelings ever. I just go because I'm a history buff. Well, me, my mom, sister, aunt, and 3 cousins went. My aunt and cousins had never been there before and keep talking about ghosts since it was October. We kept telling there's no real ghost here. Took them around for 2 days, showing them where the worst of the fighting was, historical buildings, etc. By this time they're bored and it's getting dark, so I said let's go to an area called Spangler Spring. There's usually not a lot of tourists there. Well, we get there, and when we get out of the car we all had a feeling that we should not be there. We walked around for 5 minutes, took pictures, and left. By then we're all kind of freaked, but we decided to stay on the battlefield and continue to a place called Culp's Hill. This hill has an observation tower on it that my sister and cousins decided to climb. My mom and aunt stayed in the car to smoke, and I was reading a plaque that described the battle. All of a sudden I hear gunshots and a cannon. It was a bit echoing, like it was far away. Now there's no reenactors, guns are illegal on the battlefield, so I'm thinking some drunk idiots are doing something stupid and we should call the Rangers. My mom and aunt open the car door and ask if I hear that. One of my cousins comes of the tower freaked out from the gunshots that are still going off. However, my sister and other cousins swear they hear nothing. They seriously think we messing with them. At this point we decided to leave, and they all still swear that hill was silent, and the rest of us talk about hearing the gunshots. This actually happened a month ago. Not much of a story, but I was walking through my house and I heard an actual voice that wasn't there. I don't have any mental illnesses and I wasn't sleep deprived. After I heard it for a second time, I went outside immediately to see if anyone was there. Nobody was. It was completely silent. I live alone as well and had no TVs on. Since then, I've tried to ignore what happened. You hear about these things happening to people, but try to discredit them and think they're crazy. That wasn't the case with me, and if someone says they've experienced something similar, I'll be sure to take it more seriously next time. An actual voice, man. What a mysterious world we live in. Apparently my old apartment was haunted, and when I was a baby the ghost/spirit would wake me up whenever my mom's blood sugar was low, type 2 diabetic, and as soon as she took care of herself I would be back asleep. So I guess you could say he was a nice ghost. I woke up middle of the night in my grandma living room. I was like 8. I can clearly see the kitchen table and I look to see a ghostly woman playing solitaire. She beckons to me and says my nickname. I take off to my grandma's bedroom. A couple days later I see the woman in a photo album. Turns out an older cousin was playing solitaire. She died before I was born, a couple of months before my birth. She was murdered by a stranger while passed out on the sidewalk. Before she died she would play solitaire at my grandma's table. Apparently she was really looking forward to meeting me and a couple of cousins who were born in the same 6 months of her death. It was late October 2014, and I was a part-time Army reservist in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It was days after the Ottawa shooting where a ceremonial guard was murdered at the War Memorial that I volunteered to work as a lookout/access control at the Royal Artillery Park where the brigade HQ was located at that time. Because I was a master corporal, I always was the night watch commander with 3 other reservists under my supervision. We basically worked 2 guys at the front gate, one on rest and the other did patrol rounds. It was a really quiet, easy job. Nothing too intense, just long 12-hour 8 to 8 overnight shift. The thing about RA Park is that it has the oldest buildings in the city, and across the street is the old public library that had a reputation for being haunted as it was built on top of a mass grave. The building I was in was one of those first structures that almost looks like a mansion when the city was first founded. It has only 2 floors. The first floor was open to the night watch as there was a break room for us to sit or relax in when you weren't patrolling or on the gate. The second floor was a secured area, which meant that every drawer and cabinet in each office had to be locked up. Every office had to be locked up and the door leading to the hallway on the second floor stairway also had to be locked. The windows were too old to open. So for all intent and purposes the second floor is under lock and key with no access, and the break room is next to the stairs leading up to the second floor, so anyone in the break room would have heard the outside door leading into the building opening and someone walking up the stairs. Not only that, all 4 of us had radios and the front gate would have informed me if they let someone through the gate. Keep in mind, no one from the staff that worked in the building told me that the building was haunted, but the staff always left at 4 p.m. and never stayed the night. So I'm on the break room watching TV, and I start noticing that I hear footsteps coming from the second floor. I can clearly tell that someone is walking from one end of the hallway to the other side. Not hearing anyone come inside, and I radioed the gate to see if anyone for some reason came into work at 3 a.m. No one came through the gate. So I went up to the stairs to see the access door closed. I could still hear the footsteps walking back and forth. I could see from the cracks in the door frame that the lights were still off, so I try and turn the knob to open the door. And it was locked. I hear the footsteps getting closer to the door and I start knocking trying to see who was behind the door, and I remember the footsteps stopped right at the door. Suddenly I had that creepy feeling that someone was watching me through the solid front door. I slowly back away from the door and I continue to hear the footsteps pacing back and forth. When I got to the ground floor, I went outside and I told the other 3 soldiers. One of them told me that he heard footsteps on the second floor but thought nothing of it. One of the other soldiers said one of his friends on day staff that works on the first floor feels that someone is watching them when they are working alone. I felt relief as I thought I was going crazy. From that night on, we all agreed to just stay away from the second floor door and not to look up to the second floor windows. I have had my feet pulled when sleeping. I've had my covers pulled back as well. I've had a shadow figure cover my entire kitchen floor. Have felt someone sit on the edge of my bed and sink the mattress without anyone being there. I've seen things move on their own. I have had countless experiences throughout my life and they all have been in different places. I just think I'm more sensitive to that kind of stuff. Saw a chair move across the floor at Buddy's house when I was like 11. Scared so shitless I called my mom to pick me up and never stayed the night there ever again. Me, his mom and him all witnessed it. I guess random things like that happened often in that place according to his mom. But yep. Never again did I sleep there. Once when studying abroad in Morocco, music started playing in one of the empty, locked, dorm rooms. Exactly like that old music box with the dancer sounding, but pretty loud, and went on for hours. The same tinny lullaby on loop. We got out one of those apps that detects words and phrases said by ghosts and it came up with one, amputate, in Arabic. We had no explanation. The door had been locked all semester since no one roomed there, and even if it was a music player or phone, why that weird lullaby on repeat? How did it not eventually die, whatever the source was? Multiple students heard it. I still have no idea. Back in my hometown in Ukraine, I was hanging out with a buddy, both of us around 10-ish. Warm summer evening, daylight beginning to fade. This orb of white light, the size of a baseball, maybe a little bigger, floats right over both of our heads. We were freaked out for a bit, to say the least. I don't think it was a ball lightning, seen a few of those, pretty sure there'd have been damage if we got that close to a ball lightning. I've had a couple. The night my great-grandmother died I heard loud banging sounds all night. Like someone was being on a wall. The phone rang with the news, her heart more or less popped. There were no less than 5 other people in the house and nobody knew what I was talking about. A couple years later I was in my room and saw this gold light pass in front of me. I tried to touch but it disappeared, then the phone rang to inform us my great-grandfather has passed away. Despite these experiences I don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal for that matter. I just assume there's a scientific explanation for both of these things. Stayed a hotel where it had a separate room for the bedroom in the room. Something didn't feel right but went to bed anyways. Closed the door to bedroom and all. I woke up to something climbing into bed with me in the dark. It left after a bit but was creepy. Door never opened. I fell into a doze after a bit, wondering if it was real or a dream, until it happened again a short bit later. Thankfully it was only one night stay for work. GF and I just bought an older condo unit. We have 2 huskies and almost every day one of our dogs will just stare into a corner of the living room and 1 to 2 times our other husky will randomly start barking at that same corner. We've decided to pretend it doesn't happen, lol. This happened a few years ago now, home alone. Both my cat and dog are with me. I was woken from a sound sleep by someone downstairs, whistling tunelessly. My reaction? To yell out, "Shut up, I'm sleeping." Lots of strange stuff happens in my house, but that one is a favorite of mine to share. A couple years ago, my friend and I were hanging out in an abandoned house, and I don't remember why but it felt really creepy. We had been in there before but it just felt off. I guess our fear led to something wanting to mess with us later that same day. It's crazy how we both had something creepy happen to us that night, lol. So, here's my experience. It was maybe 1 to 3 a.m. I was on my bed scrolling through Tumblr with my dog next to me. My parents were asleep downstairs, and my sister wasn't home. I hear footsteps downstairs. You can always tell when someone is walking down the hallway because the floor creaks. These footsteps were fast and light, like a child was running back and forth. Definitely not my parents' footsteps, because I would have heard their bedroom door open. Not my sister's either. I would have heard the sound of her keys opening the front door. I'm feeling spooked, but I continue to scroll. A few minutes later, I hear banging on the bathroom door. The bathroom is to the right of my room. Bang 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 bang. Like someone pounded their fist on the door. At this point I'm dying on the inside. I think I got up to lock my door. No way in hell was I going to leave my room. Another few minutes pass, and again. Bang 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 bang. This time, it was right on my bedroom door. Even my dog looked up at the door with his ears up. I was shaking lamau. I think I put headphones on and watched funny YouTube videos until I fell asleep. I probably made this comment way too long, but it's the creepiest thing to happen to me. Ever. I am a paranormal investigator. I have experienced intense paranormal activity. What people do not realize is that when you investigate they come home with you. I have had a ghost put her hand on my back. She was very jealous and clingy. She would hit me if I talked to a woman. She punched my manager in the back of his head. I went to a casino and she had the ball land on the color I chose at the roulette table. She would pinch me. She assumed we were married. She tried to get me to eat less by touching my mouth and then my stomach when I ate too much. Ask me any question if you are curious or do not believe me. By the way, tomorrow I am going to an investigation like the week before. We will probably get ups and maybe like the last one I will hear the ghost out loud. I was packing up my stuff after DMing a D&D session at a friend's house. She lives in a very nice neighborhood, the type where you always see kids and families outside when the weather's nice, where everyone who lives there has been making enough money for enough years that it's been a mighty long time since anyone there has had to worry about how they would manage to pay the bills or when their next paycheck would be showing up. It's the sort of place where people comfortably settle down to turn houses into homes, a bit cookie cutter overall, sure, but certainly no Stepford like similarly wealthy neighborhoods tend to be. Beyond recognizing that some of the kids who live there have more financial assets than I do, I've never before or since felt out of place or uncomfortable in the area, let alone in danger, except for this night. not having to plan or prep too much because I was running a casual sort of beach filler episode session since everyone just wanted an excuse to hang out together and unwind that week. I had been the first person to show up besides the host, so in waiting for everyone else to get packed up at the end of the night and to leave so I could get out of the driveway, I got caught up in conversation with the host and stuck around for like another half hour past when I could have left. Well past midnight at this point, I finally made my way to the front door, trying to manage the backpack, water bottle, and stack of TTRPG supplies in my arms. We said our farewells, the door was shut and locked behind me, and I managed to pull my keys out of my pocket to pop the trunk without dropping anything as I walked around to the back of my car, and I just suddenly feel sick. Not butterflies, not indigestion, not a sudden bout of food poisoning. No, it was that sort of gut-wrenching, necrotic wrongness you feel when you're running from something in a nightmare, but it's always there. Always chasing. Always closer. Where you know it's a matter not of if the hunt ends, but when. I'd heard people tell stories about inexplicably feeling this sort of monolithic fight or flight response without knowing why and it somehow saving their lives. But I never believed it actually was a thing, until I was standing there behind my car with my back to the street behind me, while that rotting dread was shrieking through me, my instincts demanding I dump everything into the trunk, get my ass in the car, and get every door locked before making sure I got as far away from that street as possible. I did what I could, probably looking like a fool the entire time, rushing to get in the car and slamming the buttons to engage the locks. Once safely inside, I convinced myself to just stop and take a few deep breaths. I was clearly just being irrational and having some sort of delusional, spontaneous panic attack and obviously wasn't in any sort of danger. After all, the only danger I would be in would be if I convinced myself I should be driving before first calming down and instead leaving myself too hysterical to focus and not make stupid mistakes. But that feeling just gets worse. I'm talking fear and panic making me so tense it feels like I'm about to shatter bones and damage organs if I tense up any more than I already have. I start looking around into the darkness surrounding me through all the windows in my car and see no one. I don't even see so much as something that looks like it could possibly be something out of place or out of the ordinary. That's just how cookie cutter this area can be, but somehow, I still found the epicenter of the wrongness. Again, and I can't stress this enough, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. But down the sidewalk, I see where the only road connecting this neighborhood to any other roads intersects with the street the neighborhood is built around, but instead of the road continuing through past the other side of the intersection, there is an entrance to a walking trail that snakes off into the trees. And whatever my subconscious thought was going on, that was where it thought it was. Looking at that humble little access point into the woods had me feeling like I was looking the devil himself right in the eyes. I knew that if someone had been watching me, that's exactly where they would have been standing. My options at this point are to get out of the car and go back inside, sit there and wait out the hopefully irrational panic, or just start driving and get the hell out of Dodge. I'm not going to make my friend unlock the door, stay up even later, and coddle me since the biggest danger is just an overactive imagination. But if something is going on, I don't want to stick around to find out what's what. So I drive. I force myself to maintain the speed limit as the trailhead creeps toward me on the right while directly across from it on my left, I see my one exit from this street approaching, knowing that I'll be able to follow it straight all the way down until it hits the main road through this town. At which point I'll be in the clear and will leave this panic behind, but I cannot describe how impossibly violent it felt as my car rolled through the space between the trailhead and the turn onto the road. Absolutely nothing happens and I never saw anything that could have given me any reason to feel the way I felt, so just like every other time I've left this friend's house, I turned left onto the street. Except this time it felt like I turned left onto the only escape route. The closer I got to the next turn that would put me on the main road and the farther behind me the trailhead got, the better I felt. Once I turned left to get onto the main road and finally completely broke line of sight from the trail, the pressure of the wrongness immediately lifted. By the time I was sitting at the first traffic light not even a full minute's drive down the road, I felt perfectly fine, albeit emotionally and cognitively depleted from whatever my mind and body had just put me through. To this day, I don't know what happened that night. Did I dodge something or someone that I was lucky enough to never see, or did my mind just decide it would be a nice, fun time to have an absolute irrational breakdown? I lean toward the latter, because nothing happened that night or has happened since then, and I've been back a ton of times and never had that feeling again. But as silly as it might sound, That doesn't mean I've ever been able to convince myself to stay late enough to be anywhere near the trailhead very long after the sun's gone down. I think I was about 8, and I had gotten up for breakfast. I'm the only one up, so I come down the stairs and turn the corner to go into the living room, and then to the kitchen. In the far corner was my sister's birthday balloon behind the recliner. It had been there a couple days, and I remember looking at it when it just dropped, didn't appear to be yanked down, but just disappeared behind the recliner like it was just dead weight all of a sudden. I thought no, and ran back upstairs and wouldn't come down until my parents did. Oh boy. This should be fun. I'm like a paranormal magnet. The first time I had sleep paralysis is one that sticks with me to this day. I didn't even know what it was, had to look it up later. I woke up early in the morning, not sure what time. Couldn't move anything. The shadows against one bedroom wall coalesced into this shape. Looked human and didn't at the same time. It slowly contorted into the figure of a woman. I say that because it definitely looked eldritch as shit. Like some weird sexy female horror from beyond space and time. It smiles at me, then sort of glides over to me, crawling onto the bed and straddling me. It put a weirdly shaped hand on my chest and ground against me. Then, it extended a claw and pierced my chest, splitting my ribcage and lifting my heart up to its lips. It then pushed down really hard into my hips, and I fired off. It giggled and said thanks. Then evaporated like smoke. I immediately launched myself off the bed and face first onto the floor. When I was in my late teens, I had a brief stint as a ghost hunter, like in those paranormal shows. Major amateur hour. We get lucky enough to have someone ask us to check their house, so we get our shit together and go set up. We're not filming a show or anything, just recording the place in hopes of catching something on film. I'm scouting the upstairs bathroom when I feel like someone walked over my grave. I lift my head and look around, since I'd been washing my hands. Then I see it. A figure behind me in the mirror. Looked like someone put a hand on their face and just twisted it. My fight or flight instinct made me exit stage left pretty damn quick. The only issue was, the door was on the right side of the room. So I went sailing out a second floor window instead, hit the roof and rolled out into a bush, friends close behind. That poor woman moved out a few days later. We apparently pissed off whatever was in that place. It's now a parking lot. And, finally, for now, the event that shaped my views on the paranormal. When I was a kid, I had an accident. Someone threw a cinder block at my face. Still don't know who it was, considering it was on a downward arc when it made contact with the left side of my face. Blinded my left eye and concussed the shit out of me. I spent a few months with no real depth perception. Then, like someone flipped on a light switch, I could see out of my left eye again. Really wish I couldn't. I started seeing and hearing weird shit. Places I'd been fine in before would suddenly creep me out. I'd hear whispers, see shapes moving in the distance, feel like someone was standing right behind me. And every time this happened, the vision in my left eye would static over, like an old TV with no cable reception. That snowy black and white static. One day, I'm riding my bike down the street. Not unusual, did it all the time. I lived in a small neighborhood that saw basically no traffic. On this day, I'm riding along when I see a thing come from the left side of the intersection a block ahead of me. It slowly turns its head and stares at me. I was riding one of those bikes that you pedal backwards to brake. I did that, back tire stops, front doesn't. I immediately eat shit. I tumble end over end down the street, those weird paved ones where they thought paving pebbles into it would be a good idea. There I am, tangled up in my bike, bleeding from a gash on my head and beat to shit in general. The thing just tilts its head at me, then meanders back the way it came. I was maybe 10 to 11 years old, India. Our house was in the middle of the street, so a street in India is basically a lane on both sides of which are really cramped up houses with no space in between. To set the context, my father drops me at one end with keys to the house while he goes to find a parking spot, while my aunts were coming from the opposite end. It's about 11:30 p.m. At around a quarter of the street in, I'm walking when a dog comes from behind, bites me in my right calf. I'm dead terrified as I was scared of dogs at that time. Within a second I flip back to react, but the dog just simply loosens his grip, ducks his tail between his legs and is walking backwards. Tears have already started falling. I flip back in order to run. There's a really old lady with a very dark complexion just sitting on the left side, who was not there before, and she says Bahut Badhiya Hua in Hindi, which translates to "it's so great that happened." While I'm still perplexed as why she is saying that, I flip back. The dog has gone way back, looking so scared. I flip back and that lady is not there. Now at this moment a 10-year-old boy is so scared, I couldn't breathe for a second, and then I ran. I have never ran so fast ever in my life. I ran till I reached my home where my aunts were standing, and I directly jump onto one of my aunt father's sister, hyperventilating for the next hour, told my aunts and father what happened. They didn't believe that time, took me to the doctor for rabies injection. There's no way she could have entered the house. There is a very large heavy metal gate till today on that house. There's no space between houses for her to run. I have found no possible logical explanation till date. In the weeks after my dad passed, I would wake up before my mom, go downstairs and put a scoop of coffee and sweetener in a mug for her when she woke up. After the second or third time I came downstairs shortly after her, and after doing it to find her sobbing, she told me it was something my dad always did for her. I had no idea. Was home alone one evening. Went to the bathroom, and when I went to leave, the door wouldn't turn. I thought at first it was just stuck. Our house is rather old after all, but after feeling the doorknob and jiggling it around a bit, I realized that it didn't feel like it was stuck. It felt as if someone on the other side of the door was actively holding the doorknob and matching my strength. After 3 minutes, the door suddenly opened perfectly normally. Too many to mention. But the one to be able to share without sounding insane is a car ride that took 2 hours and 20 minutes on a 55-minute route. No stops, no slow-speed highway, no brakes, no drive-through. Home route took 54 minutes. Everyone in the car still remembers it clearly. Another I can share is the walk I took with my sister to a nature sanctuary, and we're both filled with dread and head home. It's 1 hour to get there and 1 hour home. So we get home, 18 months pass, and we talk about the weird tall 20+ foot tall trees with emerald leaves and black trunks. So we head back, and the forest don't exist. We both remember it, remember the fear, the feeling of something or someone coming up the road to claim us. But we looked into it, and there never been and never was a forest there. And no, we could not have gone a wrong way. There isn't any land left in the area to discover or look into. We rarely talk about it these days. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.